Hey guys, what's up? So I just wanted to put out a video. I know I haven't put out a video in a little while. I'm house sitting right now, so I'm away from my computer, and it's kind of hard to get into a nice workflow. So I haven't been putting out too much content, but I'm gonna get back to Master Series pretty quickly. Anyway, hope you enjoy this rambly, ranty kind of video, and let me know what you think in the comments section. So you may have seen the recent Director's Take blog post from the director of Overwatch, Aaron Kelder, called Opening Up the Conversation on 5v5 and 6v6. If you haven't read it, I'll put a link to it below. It's really great. To summarize it just a little bit, it goes into the history of the major changes
what aren't you doing
in Overwatch. The first change was going from no role, or no, basically you could play 6 Winstons. Then they made it so you could only play, each team could only have one of each hero. Then the second major change was role lock. This was because, you know, you might have 5 DPS players queue up to play DPS, and then you would end up with 5 DPS players in a sport, and, you know, you would get rolled by the enemy team who had a tank because tanks are strong and they synergize with the other roles. And it's also a response to goats, which took over. And then, of course, the last change they talk about is switching from 5v5 to 6v6, or vice versa. And they talk about there's several different reasons, but the main reason is queue time. And there's a great little graph here that shows how queue times for DPS, who are the core player base of Overwatch, or the DPS players, after switching to 5v5, their queue times went drastically down. Here you can see in Overwatch 1, their average queue time was 7.5 minutes. And in Overwatch 2, it's only 3 minutes. And that's a huge leap forward. Also, interestingly enough, you can see on this graph, in addition to DPS queue times going down, everybody's queue time went down. So, you know, with that being said, I don't think there's ever going to be a way to have 6v6 again if we don't solve this queue time issue. The only way to solve the queue time issue is to get more people to play tank. And they talk about how they tried a couple things to make people play tank more. In Overwatch 1, they had this system where if you queued for tank, you would get extra XP and loot boxes. Now, if you remember in Overwatch 1, or if you've never played Overwatch 1, you remember that the loot boxes were, like, not a good reward. I remember it was just kind of a meme that everybody, like, collects the loot boxes and they just gather dust unopened. Now, that's, you know, that's the development team's problem. They were offering us something, an incentive that we didn't even really want. Another thing I remember they tried that was somewhat successful, at least it seemed like it was somewhat successful. According to them, it actually wasn't significantly successful. They gave you these fast passes, where if you queued tank, you would get a fast pass. Then you would be able to theoretically skip the line when you queued for DPS. The issue here is that they gave out way too many fast passes. So you would queue for one tank game, play one tank game, get like 7 fast passes. Then you'd queue up with a bunch of other people who also had the fast pass. If everybody has the fast pass, then no one does. So basically, I think they botched that as well. For example, if they made a system where, like, you play 3 games of tank and you get a fast pass. I don't know, maybe it would be broken. You know, maybe it would just be DPS players would just be pissed off because all the tank players would get free DPS queue times, which would make the real DPS players queue times even longer because all these tank players are cutting the line. Anyway, personally, I think we have a chance since they've changed their whole monetization system. Now, like you actually pay for skins. You don't get all the skins for free like you'd used to. And when I say you used to get all the skins for free, I don't legit mean that you got all the skins for free. But if there was a skin that you wanted, you could get it for free without paying any money. You could pay money and get it right then and there. Most of the skins, you could use your free coins that you got for free, or you could open your 600 loot boxes and you'd probably find the skin that you wanted. I think that offering real incentives to people to queue up to tank, it could really help. It doesn't help the systemic problems where people just have a little bit less fun playing tank. I'll talk about that in a second. But let's say, you know, you get gold for queuing up tank. That's money in your pocket. Like, the battle pass, the free battle pass, I think will give you like 400 coins if you complete it. 400 gold coins. You actually have a reason to queue up tank if that was given as an incentive. Plus maybe like exclusive skins if you queue up tank. Stuff like that. I just think they could try it again and be a little bit more successful with real incentives. Okay, so the next thing I want to harp on is why tank is fundamentally, or in its current state, why tank is a less queued role. And we can see from this graph that even in Overwatch 2, people still queue tank the least amount because tanks have the shortest queue time. Even though you only need one tank to queue up, they still have the shortest queue time because it's still the weakest link. Tank is still the role that people want to queue the least. So I think there's a big issue with that. This is something, so in the most recent, there's like this podcast called the Group Up Podcast. And then the most recent issue of that podcast, I think it's called like the Great July Debate or something. Flats and Emongs, or not, whatever. Anyway, they talk about how tank is anti-casual because the barrier to entry just to play tank is harder. It's different from other roles in that you just have to know more. It's a higher skill ceiling. If you want to play DPS, you pretty much need to know how to play behind your tank, how to play in the general vicinity of your supports, and how to click on the enemy. And then also just stuff like when to use your ultimate, when to push, when to fall back. But if you're a tank, you need to be like, okay, I can't follow anyone. I have to go first and make this choice myself. I have to be the leader. I have to make good positioning. I have to be aware of the people who are behind me to know if I'm getting backed up. You know, I have to be aware of my own team's cooldowns so that if they can bail me out. I have to be aware of my Ana's sightline so that she can constantly heal me. I have to be aware of what the enemy team is running and what their win condition is. How my particular hero plays into each of their heroes. I have to track ultimates because as a tank player, you're gonna eat the majority of ultimates. It's the same with all the ultimates. You know, you eat the shatter because you're right on the front line. You eat the whatever. Not only that, Not only is tank like harder, but it's also anti-casual because it's more stress. And this, I think, is down to the fact that they overbuffed the tank. And this is an issue where I'm like, you know, it feels good to play this overbuffed hero because I like getting kills and I like having a big impact. But at the same time, a lot of the time I feel cheated when I do a huge impact. I have a huge impact game and I still lose. For example, I had a game on Watch More Gibraltar the other day where we lost because I made a dumb mistake, but still at the end of the game I was 49 kills and 8 deaths. Yes, we lost because I made a single dumb mistake right at the end, but it feels like you shouldn't lose a game where you have 49 kills. I sometimes it just really pisses me off. Like, you have the stress of knowing that even if you hard carry, like, slipping up means that the other tank is going to hard carry more than you hard carried. The idea is that the tank is so fucking powerful, they can team wipe. Like, you can kill everybody on the enemy team by yourself. And that means, like, if you don't kill everybody by yourself, you're a failure. And I don't like that. Making tank less overpowered would ironically, I think, draw people to the tank role. Because it's less of a burden on you to win. It's less of a burden on you to deal with all the counter picking. And the reason they buffed tanks in the first place is because they wanted to keep Overwatch 2 similar to Overwatch 1 in terms of the gameplay loop. That meant that you have to make one tank more like 2 tanks. The problem is, one tank is not 2 tanks. One tank can get shut down pretty effectively. The great thing about Overwatch 1 tanks is that you'd have 2 things that were different. For instance, if you were playing Winston, you weren't immediately countered if they went Bastion because you would have a diva on your team. At least when people are not troll picking. But even when they're troll picking, let's say they don't go diva, they go Roadhog or something, at least you're not the sole target for that counter pick. That Bastion is going to get a little bit less value because now he has 2 tanks to deal with. So in Overwatch 2, when you're just a solo tank, you're getting shut down more. And it's because you're buffed, because you're overbuffed, it's more important and more effective to just play to counter the tank, which is the sorry state of the game right now. And to be honest, I think a lot of it stems from the fact that a valuable, incredibly valid win condition inbuilt into the game is shutting down the tank. And if you just pick Bastion when they pick Ryan, and then when they swap the ball, you pick Sombra, you can shut down the tank. And you can just boost your chances of winning by a lot, very simply. Just by making that tank annoyed that they have to go back to spawn and pick a hero that they didn't really queue up wanting to play. And also just by like shutting them down in general, because if you keep swapping to counter them, you're gonna keep keeping them in check. And that's, as I said, the sorry state of tanking, the sorry state of Overwatch, the sorry state of DPS and support. It's the sorry meta that we live in. So, I honestly want tank nerfs. I think a tank should still be a threat, but it shouldn't be on them alone to push and take space. And I would just like to see what Overwatch 2 would look like without Gigabuff tank. Revert all those, not all the tank buffs, but revert a lot of those tank buffs that they did at the start of Overwatch 2.
Hold this corner over here.
So, instead of Sigma having like 550 health,
push us.
Bring him back to 400 health. Same with Zarya. Instead of Ryan having a massive shield and a massive health pool and double fire strike, bring him back to where he was. Bring him in line. Then it puts less pressure on that tank to be the only one taking space and the only one carrying. You know? I don't think tank players would mind, because it means that they're on an even footing with their teammates. I'd just be interested to see what that looks like. And ultimately, I think it would serve in making the tank role less stressful and more fun to play. In the blog post, they talk about perhaps figuring out a way to merge some of the upsides of 6v6 with the upsides of 5v5. I think an interesting thing that could be done is splitting tanks into two separate roles. One would be a main tank, you could only have one of these, and the other would be an off tank. And the off tank role would overlap with the DPS role. So you would have a your main tank. This would be someone like Reinhardt, Ramatra, Ball. These heroes would be good at going in and sponging up damage. And then behind them, you would have a much nerfed tank who was focused on DPS. This would be Zarya, Diva, Roadhog. And then you would switch a number of the DPS heroes into this role. And that, it would be like a little trick, like, oh, you're a DPS player, you want to play Symmetra? Well, now you're an off-tank player. And then you would just scoot a lot of the, like, sole DPS players. I'm talking the Pharahs, the Tracers, the Widowmakers, the DPS heroes that their identity is specifically dealing damage and not really anything else. Whereas maybe a Torbjorn could have some kind of off-tank capability. And of course, this would all need reworks. You know, you couldn't just port Symmetra into the off-tank role and have it work. Maybe you could, I don't know. But they'd need some kind of off-tank ability that would help their other tank survive. Like maybe Symmetra, she's like the shielding whiz. Maybe she could, you know, grant a shield to an ally, similar to how Zarya can grant a shield to an ally. Maybe Torbjorn could grant armor to an ally. I don't know. Honestly, I don't know. I know this wouldn't perfectly solve everything, because you'd still have insane DPS queue times for the dedicated DPS role. And the other idea I have is to offload some of these DPS into the support role. So in the same way that Zenyatta is kind of, he's a support who deals a crap ton of damage, we could have more of those. We could maybe have, I don't know, Soldier 76. Instead of, we could trade his ultimate. So instead of a visor that auto aims, you give him, I don't know, like a heal rocket or something, a heal launcher. I don't know. A side note, interestingly enough, even though support is one of the more queued roles, because people love playing support, they only have 8 heroes to choose from. Whereas the DPS, I think it's either 21 or 23 heroes that they have to choose from. I wish they could have made heroes with with role lock in mind. Of course, you know, that's not how it worked. Overwatch was not designed with role lock in mind. More than half of the roster is DPS. There's 10 tanks, 8 supports, and like 23 DPS. That's insane. Like, of course people are gonna be drawn to DPS. Like, if you, I know this isn't the case, but if you were to just randomly pick a hero, it would be a DPS hero. Of course, people don't randomly pick heroes. That's why a lot of people gravitate to support, because They like it's a different play style. And that's why a lot of people, even though there's 10 tanks, we have quite a diverse cast in tanks, especially when there's only one tank player. People don't like playing tank as much because it's harder, it's stressful. And to kind of expand upon this direction a little bit, what if there was like a way you could, maybe there's like 3 roles you can queue up. You can queue up tank, you can queue up DPS tank flex, and you can queue up support tank flex. And in the same way that in League of Legends, sometimes you just have to play jungler because no one else wants to queue jungler. If you don't know about League of Legends, there's 5 roles, and you can queue up for 5 roles, and you have your primary role that you pick and your secondary role that you pick. Usually you get your primary, oftentimes you get your secondary, and sometimes you just get a role that the game says, here you go. And a lot of times that's going to be jungler, and you're just going to have to fill. And even though it's super annoying, I wouldn't trade it. I don't think anybody would trade it because it results in faster queue times. No one wants to sit in matchmaking for 10 to 15 minutes waiting because no one is queuing this particular role at a time. And remember, in League of Legends, there's 5 roles. So it's harder to... Like, if there's no junglers queuing at the time, without this system, your queue times are going to go through the roof. That's another solution, potentially. Like, you force people to play tank. This could also have the positive upside of helping people learn tank, which, as I said, is a challenging role. A lot of people who don't play tank don't fucking know how tank works, and they don't know the whims of tank, or the woes of tank. You know, for instance, getting the person who one-tricks Mercy to play tank, and then they get a Mercy on their team who won't swap, and they're just like sitting there fuming because because they need more than just Mercy in some situations. Or not to just bully Mercy players, but like just one thing that really bothers me sometimes as a tank player is when I get the Lifeweaver Mercy comp on my team. And when it would really be more useful for us to have something like a Zen or a Baptiste, someone who can deal damage and help me in a way that isn't just healing me. Sometimes it works, but like as a tank player, you're acutely aware of the times when it doesn't work because you just get farmed. The Mercy and Lifeweaver players are just going to be perpetually unaware of like how their actions are affecting the team is because they're one-tricking it. They never get a perspective of what that's like when they're not playing that hero. And forcing them onto a tank would be a really good way of, you know, helping them expand their Overwatch IQ instead of letting them just perpetually be in darkness while they throw like 40% of the games, because Mercy's just a bad pick here. Lifeweaver's just a dumb pick here. And to the Lifeweaver mains, you know, even though you're bailing me out several times a match because this Reinhardt just walked on me and I needed to get bailed out, I would rather you just pick Zenyatta and then shoot the Reinhardt and discord the Reinhardt, and we wouldn't have to be in a situation where I need to get bailed out in the first place, because the Reinhardt will either be dead if he comes too close to me, or we'll just have to back up and then we can take space. Anyway, that's a little bit of a tangent, but yeah, so in conclusion, maybe some kind of a queuing system where you don't necessarily have to get the role that you queue for. It's whatever serves the queue times. And yes, DPS players might be annoyed about this, but especially if we add incentives to queuing for tank, like a pass you got for queuing tank that would prevent you from getting auto-filled into the tank role. when you queue support or DPS. Or, you know, like you get some extra gold, or you get some extra progress towards a nice skin. You could totally mitigate some of those issues with people being pissed off about being forced to queue tank. All right. Thanks for listening to me ramble and my thoughts. Go and check out that blog post if you haven't. It's good and informative, especially if you haven't played Overwatch 1. Talks about a lot of the major changes that they made. All right, I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace out.